Jed is a college junior. He's recently gotten interested in bodybuilding, exercising some of his muscles, but it raises some questions about the strength of a contraction, the muscles he can exercise, how muscles work, some of those major muscle groups. And so let's answer some of those questions kind of along the way. First, remember that muscle is a tissue. So there's three different types of muscle tissue. There's skeletal muscle, which is attached to your bones. It's striated, so you see these lines or stripes in it. It's voluntary, you can control it. Cardiac muscle is branched. It's also striated, it has lines in it. It's involuntary, you can't control it. Smooth muscle does not have the striations, and it's also involuntary. It lines internal organs, like your blood vessels, for example, and your digestive tract are smooth muscles. The functions of muscles are things like movement and posture. Your muscles help support your body as well as produce heat. But it also has these interesting traits that muscle tissue is elastic, it's able to stretch, that it's contractile, it's able to shorten, but it's extensible like a rubber band. It can stretch and shorten, but it retains its shape. And it's excitable, that is, it responds to stimuli. So if I toss a ball to you, you can move your hand to catch it. Muscles work in pairs, and the force the muscle puts on the skeleton is not static, it's dynamic. So as your muscle strength changes, it can move and distort your skeleton. So here's a case of upper cross syndrome, UCS, upper cross syndrome. That's a result of a shortened pectoralis major muscles. So the chest muscles are shortened, they're pulling the shoulders in. The back muscles are getting lengthened, they're stretching out. And it leads to some predictable injuries, tension headaches, rotator cuff injuries, as a result of that misalignment in the skeletal system. So good posture looks something like the middle picture. Upper cross syndrome looks something more like the picture to the this one, and lower cross syndrome looks like this one. The good news is that they can be corrected by lengthening the pectoralis muscles, stretching them, by strengthening the back muscles, contracting them. That can bring the skeletal system back into a proper alignment. Many of your skeletal muscles are being contracted even though you don't think about it. So the muscles that maintain your posture are in a state of contraction even though you're not consciously thinking about flexing your lower back muscles or your abdominal muscles, your core muscles even. Here are some of those major muscle groups. Like the trapezius, shrug your head, or your deltoid helps to raise your arm. Your pectoralis muscles moves your arm across your chest. Your rectus abdominis muscles are your abs. Your obliques help you move from side to side. Your quadriceps help you kick your leg out. Your hamstrings help you curl your leg. Your gastrocnemius or calf muscles help you to flex your foot and point your toes and things like that. So all these muscles, 600 different muscles or more in the human body, and they all act the same way. They all pull on bones. Muscles can't push on a bone, they pull on it by their contraction. So typically they work in pairs. One flexes while the other relaxes, and then it will flex. But sometimes they work in groups, like the quadriceps. All four of those muscles are working to extend the lower leg. There's three major muscles in the hamstrings, and they all contract to flex the lower leg. So you have over 600 skeletal muscles. When muscles are working together, they're called synergistic. When muscles are opposed, they're called antagonistic. So flexing means we're narrowing the angle of the joint, and muscles do that while some are being extended. So those are antagonistic muscles, they're being lengthened. Whenever you flex a muscle, it contracts, but it doesn't just contract to the middle, it contracts to one point. So on your biceps, for example, the origin of the muscle is here, and the muscle is contracting to that point. So that's the insertion is where it's attached to the lever. So it's kind of anchored at the origin, and it's attached to the lever at the insertion. Tendons are the connective tissue that's attaching muscle to bone. If those tendons get inflamed and irritated, we call it tendinitis. Notice here how muscles are bundles within bundles. So you have the individual muscle cell. That muscle cell is consisting of many different myofibrils. That's part of the cytoskeleton of the muscle cell. But those muscle cells might be bound together in a group called a fascicle, and those are bound together, those multiple fascicles bound together, and those are kind of bundled up together, and that bundle is bundled up together until it makes your biceps. So just think about muscles as bundles of bundles of bundles. Within a muscle cell, you have myofilaments and you have myofibrils. So all these different parts. But the functional unit of contraction in a muscle is a sarcomere. Right? The sarcomere goes from one Z line to the next Z line. So the letter A is hovering over one of those Z lines. And they're characterized by these overlapping bands of actin, which is a protein, and myosin, which is a protein. So C are the smaller, more numerous actin fibers. B is the thicker myosin fibers. So those are the filaments. Actin and myosin are filaments. Here we can see how that sarcomere is contracting. The myosin is pulling those actin filaments in toward the center, causing the whole muscle cell to contract. Here's kind of what it looks like. Again, we have the whole muscle broken down to bundles. Those muscle fibers are cells. Those muscle cells are made up of myofibrils and myofilaments, and actin and myosin are examples of myofilaments. Here's another diagram of the idea of a sarcomere, and this is how you can sort of see what striations are. Striations are those overlapping bands of actin and myosin. It creates kind of a dark band in the muscle. The Z line are where one sarcomere is attaching to another. The green is the actin, the purple here is myosin. When the sarcomere is contracted, you can see how it's just the actin that moves in. So bodybuilders, they like to talk a lot about taking protein supplements or even amino acid supplements. Well, those amino acid supplements are going to be used to build protein molecules. Actin and myosin are proteins. One way you can tell is that ion ending. The sliding filament model seeks to explain muscle contraction on a cellular level. It starts with the resting actin and myosin. Then a cross bridge forms. The myosin connects to the actin, and it connects with this kind of bar that has a movable kind of top. That top kicks in, that's called the power stroke. Now that costs some energy, so ATP is going to be expended for that top to kind of kick in. That's called the power stroke. Then that cross bridge is going to detach, which allows the actin and myosin to slide past each other again to a relaxed stage. So just think of those 4 stages: cross bridge, power stroke, detach, relax. Now, in order for this to be controlled, there has to be something that prevents the cross bridges from attaching, because as soon as it's available, the cross bridges make those attachments. As long as there's ATP, they can be cocked back into place. So to control it, we need to have something that prevents the cross bridge attachments. That's another set of proteins, troponin and tropomyosin. They provide kind of like a safety. So once the safety is removed, the cross bridge can form. That allows the muscle to be contracted. But without that availability, there's no contraction. Calcium is what removes that troponin-tropomyosin complex. So calcium ions will move into the cell, removes that safety, the cross bridge will form, power stroke, detach, relax. So here's an animation that kind of shows what those things are like. So the calcium is released, the cross bridge is formed, there's a power stroke that causes some ATP to recock that myosin back, and there's a detach, and then the whole muscle cell relaxes. It kind of looks again something like this. So as those myosin parts are moving, they're pulling the actin parts in, which causes the cell to contract. That's a sliding filament model. Muscle contraction can only occur if there's ATP. So without ATP, there's no cross bridging, there's no detaching of that cross bridge. So what does that mean? Well, basically what that means is whenever a person dies, their muscles start to stiffen up. And the reason they stiffen up is because the cross bridges can't detach. After a while, though, the actin and myosin proteins begin to denature. They start to break down. That usually happens after 2 to 3 days. So when a person first dies, their muscles kind of stiffen because of their lack of ATP to relax them. And then as time goes on, the actin and myosin start to break down and the muscles get limp. So sometimes a dead person is called a stiff because their muscles are so stiff. And forensic scientists can use this information to try to figure out just how long it's been since a person has died. The motor neuron takes a signal and sends it to the muscle from the nervous system. That's how our brain kind of controls our body. The motor neuron releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, or ACH, acetylcholine. That's going to initiate a contraction by releasing calcium ions. So the nerve impulse travels down the nerve. It releases this neurotransmitter, goes across this little space called a synapse. It enters the muscle cell. That causes calcium to be released. That releases the troponin-tropomyosin complex. That causes the actin to connect to the myosin. And then that causes this kind of sliding of the filaments. I point out all these steps because there's so many steps. There are so many things that can go wrong. Each of those things has a name, like paralysis if you can't send that nerve impulse, or like muscular dystrophy if you have a buildup of too much calcium in your muscle cells. So there's all kinds of things that might go wrong, and we might be glad that so often our muscles contract and everything goes right. Muscular dystrophy is a genetic disease. It's too much calcium, and that kills the muscle cells eventually. So the muscle cells are replaced by fat and connective tissue, and that individual starts to lose muscle strength and coordination. So that's muscle contraction on the cellular level. How about muscle contraction as the whole muscle level? There's 5 major factors that contribute to maximum strength when you're contracting your muscles. The first one is length-tension relationships, the relationship between this actin and myosin. So if there's good overlap, there's going to be a strong contraction. If the overlap isn't very good, the contraction is not going to be very good. So maximum overlap, maximum strength. You take a look at the graph here, you'll see muscles that are too tight. So that would be the 1s. You might see muscles that are pulled or stretched too much. That would be 3 and 4. But a muscle that's properly warmed up would be number 2. That's the maximum strength available because it's got the best cross bridging. The second major factor is a phenomenon called recruitment. Recruitment means that we're going to increase the number of motor units. A motor unit is the nerve and the muscle it controls. Now, sometimes the number of muscle cells vary. So that nerve might control a small number of muscle cells, or it might control a very large number of muscle cells. Think of it kind of like the military. If there's a small job, then a small force is necessary. If there's a large job, then a larger force is necessary. If there's a huge invasion, then a massive force is necessary. So the motor neuron is kind of like the officer. So some officers control a few troops, whereas other officers control lots of troops. Some nerves control few cells, other nerves control many cells. So if you're picking up something that's very lightweight, you might just need a nerve that's associated with muscle cells. There's not very many of them. The whole muscle will contract, but only a few cells are actually doing the work. If it's a heavier weight, then a larger motor unit might be necessary. Or sometimes your body will use more motor units might be necessary. So lots of little groups in order to accomplish that contraction. Here's an example of a person who's doing some leg extensions. There's a motor unit right there, nerve, and some of the muscles required to lift that much weight. If we increase the weight, we need to also increase the motor units. So maybe more motor units are involved, more cells are involved. Again, we could increase the maximum number of motor units, but maybe not be able to lift the maximum amount of weight that's available. So our body has to kind of judge what is our maximum number of motor units that we can recruit in order to exert that force, and sometimes the force is just too great. We can't lift it. So here's another example. A small weight, one motor unit. A heavier weight, we might choose a large motor unit. We might choose B, lots of little motor units. Or we might choose C, a motor unit that has a whole bunch of cells associated with it. So how can recruitment influence strength? Well, the more motor units, the whole muscle contracts no matter how many motor units are involved, but the more motor units, the more strength you are exerting. Or perhaps motor units with more cells in them. Precise movements are small muscles. The whole muscle contracts. It's small, like your eyeballs move from side to side, but the whole muscle is small. So it results in very precise movements, small movements. Gross movements are large muscles, like your quadriceps. So all this muscle is being contracted, even if you're just moving your leg a little tiny bit. That's called a gross movement because the whole large muscle contracts. Just keep in mind the whole muscle contracts regardless of the motor unit size. The motor unit size is going to determine how strong that contraction is going to be. The third major factor is summation. Summation just means we add together nerve impulses. So muscle twitch just means that the muscle contracts all or none. So the cell contracts with everything it's got or it doesn't contract at all. So a single twitch causes that muscle cell to contract. If we can add a nerve impulse before the muscle cell has a chance to relax, we add the strength of those contractions together. We sum them together. We add them up. So we can cause that muscle cell to continue to increase the strength of its contraction. Can we do it indefinitely? The answer is no. We increase the strength of the contraction to a point, and then the muscle is completely contracted, and that state is called tetanus. Can the muscle stay in tetanus forever? The answer is no. At some point it runs out of ATP and can no longer stay contracted, and then the muscle will relax. So you've experienced this while you've tried to carry something, and then at some point you say, look, I got to put it down. I can't carry it any longer, or I'm just going to drop it. Well, that's fatigue. Your muscles have been in tetanus for a certain amount of time. Now they've hit fatigue. So how does summation influence strength? Well, it does increase the strength of each motor unit. It also allows your body to sustain a contraction. Like when you contract your muscles, you don't just contract it and then it goes right back to where it was. You can contract it slowly in a controlled way. You can hold it in a contracted position for a while. That's summation. Summation is also what gives your muscles tone. So muscle tone is like a firmness of the muscle. It's always slightly contracted. So it feels kind of firm. Muscles that aren't contracted at all, that are just limp, are called flaccid. Energy is important for a muscle contraction. So as your muscles are contracted, they burn through a lot of energy. So they're going to burn through their stored ATP. They're going to recycle the creatine phosphate. That will help recycle ATP. And then they'll start breaking down glycogen into glucose and then breaking down glucose units through the process of glycolysis. All this in the presence of oxygen to get loss of ATP. So how is ready energy important to muscle contraction? Well, it's the energy that powers motor units. So without that energy, your motor units won't contract. It's energy that sustains contractions. Once you run out of energy, then you hit fatigue. Aerobic respiration is going to give you 36 ATPs for every sugar. But anaerobic respiration only gives you 2, so significantly less. Aerobic means with oxygen. Anaerobic means without oxygen. So picture yourself in a sprint. The first 6 seconds, you burn through all the ATP that your muscles can store. So the creatine phosphate recharges that ATP and then you burn through it again. Now, you've only gone 10 seconds into the race. So now you need to start breaking down glycogen into glucose and then glucose in the presence of oxygen, aerobic respiration, to get those ATP. If you have a lot of glycogen stored, you can sustain that pace for a while. But after whatever it is, 10 miles, 5 miles, 26 miles, at some point your muscles run out of oxygen. They switch to anaerobic respiration and you hit what's called the wall. Your energy level has dropped so far that you can't sustain that pace. Now, the type of muscle cell also matters when it comes to the strength of the contraction. You have different types of muscle cells or fibers. Some are slow twitch. They're meant for sustaining contractions, endurance. Some are fast twitch. They're meant for speed, power. So the type of muscle helps to influence the strength. If you have a lot of fast twitch muscles, your muscles are going to be very bulky. They're going to be very quick, but they're not going to last very long. Slow twitch is going to be for endurance strength. So if you have a lot of slow twitch fibers, you can sustain a fast pace for a long time. If you do more resistance exercises, you build up your fast twitch muscles. If you do more aerobic exercises, you'll build up your slow twitch fibers. Here's what a cross-section of a muscle looks like. You'll notice that there's dark red. You'll notice that there's white. All right, so the white are the fast twitch muscle fibers. They're white because there's not a lot of mitochondria. Remember that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, supplying that energy. So these white are very fast contracting muscle fibers. They are very large in cross diameter. They exert a lot of power. But the dark red ones, they're for sustaining a contraction. So they have lots of mitochondria. They're going to have a lot of blood supply heading in their direction. They contract very slowly. So most people have a mix of these. A sprinter is going to have a lot more of the white fibers. A marathon runner is going to have a lot more of the dark red. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about muscle structure, muscles on a cellular level, and strength of contraction for whole muscles.